The river was swollen from recent rains, its surface broken by swirling currents that pulled debris downstream. In the middle of the rush, a young male lion struggled to keep his head above water. His mane clung flat to his body, soaked and heavy, dragging him deeper each time he tried to lift himself. The current spun him sideways, and for a moment only the pale flash of his paw broke the surface before he went under again. When he rose, his breath came in a desperate gasp, his eyes wide with the confusion of an animal that had never faced water like this. Rangers on the opposite bank saw him. Their first thought was how far from safety he already was. The lion had likely misjudged the crossing, swept into the strongest part of the channel. His back legs thrashed, but the river dragged him downstream, closer to a bend where the water ran faster and rocks jutted from the current. If he hit them, he would not rise again. The rangers moved quickly but without panic, running along the bank searching for the narrowest point where they might have a chance to reach him. Every second mattered. If he lost strength, he would be gone in minutes. The lion tried to grip onto a broken branch floating beside him. His claws scraped, but the branch spun away, leaving him once again to the force of the water. He turned with the current, chest heaving, coughing from the spray, but his movements were slowing. The rangers shouted to each other, pulling a rope from their pack. Samuel, the lead among them, tied it around his waist, his face set not in fear, but in focus. "If he sinks now, it's over," he said quietly. The others anchored themselves on the bank, holding the rope taut as Samuel waded in. The water struck him hard. Even for a human with training, the pull was dangerous. Each step was forced, feet dragging across the muddy bottom, but Samuel moved carefully, never rushing. The lion caught sight of him and thrashed, sending another spray of water into the air. His strength was fading, but instinct kept him fighting. His mouth opened wide as if in a silent roar, but no sound came, only a wet cough as the river swallowed more of him. Samuel edged closer, reaching the line where the current met the shallows. The lion's body jolted as the water spun him sideways again. He was moments from slipping under fully. "Hold steady," Samuel called back, his voice firm but calm. The rope went taut as he lunged forward, arm outstretched. His hand brushed against the lion's wet mane. The animal twisted, striking out with one paw, claws flashing. But the swipe had no power behind it, only a desperate reflex. If Samuel let go, the lion would be gone. He caught hold again, this time gripping beneath the lion's shoulder where the skin folded. With one motion, he heaved upward as the men on the bank hauled back on the rope. The lion's body surged against him, heavy, thrashing, but no longer strong enough to resist. The two forces combined, Samuel pulling from the water, the rangers straining from the shore, shifted the lion out of the deepest current and toward the edge. For a long moment it looked uncertain. The lion's head dipped below the surface, only bubbles marking where he had gone under. Samuel tightened his grip, teeth clenched as the rope cut against his waist. Then the lion rose again, coughing water, chest heaving against the strain. His paws found the sand beneath the shallows, dragging, scraping, but holding. The rangers gave a final pull, and both man and lion crashed together into the wet sand of the bank. The lion collapsed immediately, his body trembling with exhaustion. Water poured from his mouth and nose in short bursts as his chest shuddered. He lay on his side, eyes half closed, breath shallow and broken. Samuel knelt beside him, resting one hand lightly against the wet mane, steadying his own breath. The river surged on, loud and indifferent, but the lion was no longer within it. He was alive, though just barely. If he rose, there was hope. If he did not, the effort would have been too late. The lion lay half in the water, half on the wet sand, his mane still dragging with the weight of the river. Each breath came shallow, ribs lifting and falling as if he could not decide whether to keep trying. His eyes blinked slowly, lids heavy with exhaustion. The rangers stood only a few steps away, watching closely. Samuel raised a hand, signaling the others to bring more rope. The current still tugged at the lion's lower body, threatening to pull him back if they hesitated. Two men tied a long rope to a thick branch lodged near the bank, anchoring it firm in the mud. Another loop was prepared with practiced hands, the fibers rough but strong. The goal was clear: pull the lion fully onto dry ground before the water claimed him again. But the risk was just as plain. If they rushed, he might panic, and in his panic, he could lash out. The rangers moved with steady patience, their movements quiet and sure. The air was filled only with the river's rush and the low rasp of the lion's breath. Samuel crouched closer, letting the rope slide into place near the lion's shoulders. The animal stirred weakly, eyes flashing open. His paw lifted, a feeble attempt at resistance, but it dropped again almost at once, claws sinking into the wet sand. "Easy now," Samuel whispered, though the words were more for the men than for the lion. If the lion wasted what little strength remained, there would be nothing left for survival. The rope was tightened slowly, loop firm but not harsh, guiding rather than constraining. The others began to pull, each step measured. The lion's body shifted against the sand, dragged inch by inch away from the sucking pull of the river. Water poured from his mane, his chest jolting with the strain. His legs twitched as if trying to find footing, but they folded beneath him, too weak to hold. Still, his head lifted for a moment, mouth opening in a heavy, wet gasp before he sank again. The rangers pulled harder. Muscles in their arms strained, boots sliding in the mud as the weight of the animal resisted them. For every meter gained, the river seemed determined to reclaim him. The lion coughed, a wet sound that sprayed water onto the sand. His body convulsed, chest rising and falling unevenly, but he did not strike out. His strength was gone. All that remained was whether the men could bring him far enough to safety before the current took hold again. Step by step, the rope drew him farther up. His hind legs scraped the shallows, his tail dragging behind, leaving a faint mark in the sand. The men worked in silence, faces set, sweat already darkening their collars despite the cool air. They did not stop to rest. To pause now was to risk everything. If he slid backward, the river would not release him twice. Finally, with one last heave, the lion's full body cleared the waterline. He collapsed completely onto the damp sand, his flank heaving with shallow breaths. His mane spread in a dark halo across the ground, dripping steadily. The rope was slipped loose, dropped aside, no longer needed. For a moment, none of the rangers spoke. The silence held, broken only by the faint rattle in the lion's throat. Samuel knelt once more, watching the rise and fall of the ribs, the fragile rhythm that marked life. The lion's eyes fluttered, unfocused, then closed again. He was alive, but only just. Every breath seemed balanced on the edge of failure. If he recovered strength here on the bank, he might yet live. If not, the river's damage would follow him even on dry land. The risk was plain. One wrong turn, and all they had done would not be enough. The lion lay stretched across the wet sand, his body unmoving except for the faint tremor of his chest. His mane clung to him in dark strands, water dripping in slow rhythm from the ends. His mouth hung slightly open, foam and river water pooling at the corner. Around him the air was quiet, the rush of the river behind softened now by distance, but the silence was heavy, pressing. Samuel lowered himself to one knee, close enough to watch each shallow breath. The others stood a little back, waiting for his signal. Samuel spoke softly, voice steady, almost as if the sound might anchor the animal in place. "Stay with us," he said, words low. Barely more than a breath. The lion's ear flicked once, a small, involuntary response, then stilled again. His eyes remained shut. The stillness was dangerous. A lion that did not resist, that did not fight, was already close to the edge of letting go. The men knew they could not wait long. Time pressed against them as firmly as the river had. If his breathing slowed further, if his body surrendered to the weight of exhaustion, no effort would bring him back. The choice was stark. move now to help him recover or risk losing him entirely. They had seen animals survive the water only to die minutes later on land, the shock too much for the body to bear. Samuel studied the rhythm of his chest. Each breath was uneven, shallow, as though the lungs refused to fill. He gestured for the kit, and one of the rangers handed it forward. Inside was nothing extraordinary: a blanket, water, and a few basic supplies used in emergencies. Samuel unfolded the thick canvas and spread it gently across the lion's back. The mane was heavy with water, still cold from the river, and he knew the animal's strength would not return if the chill set deeper. The blanket clung to the wet fur, but it offered at least a shield against the wind. The lion gave a faint groan, his chest tightening. His body shifted just enough that his paw dragged across the sand. His claws extended slightly, scraping, then slid back. It was no strike, only a flicker of life. Samuel placed one hand lightly on the lion's side, steady but without pressure. The others watched carefully, waiting for any sign of danger, but none came. The lion was too far gone to fight. "His breathing's not holding," Samuel murmured. The men exchanged quick glances but said nothing. They all knew. If the breaths broke, the animal would not recover. Samuel lifted the lion's head slightly, tilting it so water drained more easily from his mouth. Another cough came, wet and rough, forcing out a thin spray that darkened the sand. The chest lifted a little fuller, but the rhythm was still weak, still unsteady. Minutes stretched in silence. Each moment without improvement made the risk clearer. If they delayed, he would not rise again. The balance was narrow. To push too much might frighten him. To do nothing was worse. Samuel's voice returned, calm and steady. "You've come through worse than this," he said, not for comfort, but to mark the moment with sound. Again, the lion's ear flicked faintly. His body remained heavy. Still, yet the chest continued its shallow rise and fall. The decision could no longer wait. Samuel glanced back at the others and nodded. "We start moving him now," he said quietly. If they left him lying still, his strength would drain away with every breath. If they acted, there was a risk of panic, but it was the only chance left. The truth was plain. If they waited too long, he would not recover at all. The lion's body shuddered once, a sharp convulsion that broke the stillness. His chest tightened, then a harsh cough forced water from his throat, splattering onto the sand. The sound was raw, rough, but it carried a weight of relief. Samuel leaned closer, steadying the lion's head so it tilted to the side. More water spilled mixed with foam, draining from his mouth. For the first time since he had been pulled from the river, the air filled with something other than silence. The chest lifted again, shallow but visible. A faint wheeze followed, uneven and unsteady, yet it was breath. Samuel kept his hand firm against the lion's side, measuring the fragile rhythm. Each rise and fall was uncertain, too light to guarantee survival, but it was proof that life still held. Behind him, the men exchanged brief glances, shoulders easing. None spoke, not wanting to break the moment, but relief moved quietly among them. Another cough came, weaker than the first, but more water spilled out, the lion's body jerking with the effort. His foreleg dragged slightly across the sand, claws catching in the grit, then fell back. He was not strong enough to move fully, but the twitch carried its own message. He was not finished yet. Samuel nodded once, calm but resolute. "He's fighting," he said softly, enough for the others to hear. The lion's breaths came quicker now, though still shallow. His nostrils flared, pulling in the damp air, releasing it in rattled bursts. Each breath seemed to scrape against his lungs as though the water had not yet released its hold. The risk remained close. If the rhythm broke again, if his body tired before clearing what remained, he would slip back into stillness. The men stayed near, rope coiled at their feet, ready if another movement sent him toward the water's edge. But for now, the lion lay heavy on the sand, chest trembling, caught between survival and collapse. Samuel lifted the blanket higher, covering more of the mane, pressing the wet fabric gently to wick away water. The lion groaned low in his throat, a faint rumble of discomfort, but no strength followed it. His eyes opened briefly, two narrow slits, glazed and unfocused, before closing again. The sight was enough to draw a slow breath from the men. He was aware, however dimly. Awareness meant will, and will could carry him forward. Minutes dragged into longer silence, broken only by the uneven sound of air scraping in and out of the lion's chest. Each time his body jolted with another cough, Samuel steadied him, letting his head turn so nothing blocked the flow. More water came, though less each time, until only the rasp of his breath remained. His ribs rose slightly fuller now, the muscles of his flank twitching in small, involuntary bursts as the body struggled to reset itself. The men did not move away. They stood as sentinels, watchful, each focused on the fragile process unfolding in front of them. For every flicker of strength, there was risk of loss. If exhaustion pressed too hard, if the breaths faltered, the chance of survival would vanish. Samuel repeated the truth quietly for himself and for the others. He's not safe yet. But as the lion's chest lifted once more, slightly stronger, the sand beneath him marked by steady drips from his mane, the weight of certainty began to shift. The breaths were still shallow, still broken, but they were there. For now, that was enough. The edge between life and death had not yet closed, and on the riverbank a quiet relief settled into the air. The air along the riverbank had settled into a tense calm. The young male lay stretched on the sand, his chest rising in a shallow rhythm, each breath a fragile link between survival and collapse. The rangers kept their distance but stayed alert, eyes fixed on the faint movement of his ribs. It was then, from the thicket just beyond the bank, that the sound of rustling brush broke the quiet. Every head turned at once. The noise was deliberate, steady, not the random shift of wind through leaves. Something was moving closer. Branches bent, stems snapped softly under weight. Samuel straightened, hand raised to still the others. They knew better than to rush forward. Sudden movement now could spark the wrong kind of reaction. From the edge of the brush, a shape emerged. Tawny, lean, unmistakable. A lioness stepped into the open, her muscles taut beneath her coat, her eyes fixed on the scene before her. She paused only meters away, tail low, head angled slightly forward. The rangers froze. They had expected the young male to belong to a pride somewhere nearby. But to see another lion appear so quickly was startling. The risk was immediate. If she saw the men as a threat rather than help, the moment could turn. A protective lioness, faced with humans standing over a weakened male, might charge without hesitation. The men braced inwardly, prepared to retreat if needed, but Samuel held his ground. He had seen the angle of her head, the measured way she lowered herself. There was no roar, no snap of teeth. She was not attacking. She was watching. The lioness took one step forward, then stopped. Her gaze shifted between the male on the ground and the men standing back from him. Her ears twitched, catching the small cough that shook his chest. She lowered her head further, not in submission, but in wary recognition of his state. The young male groaned softly, a sound rough with exhaustion. And his tail flicked once against the sand. His eyes opened halfway, enough to catch sight of her form. A faint rumble vibrated in his throat, not threat, but acknowledgement. The lioness moved closer, slow and deliberate, her paws silent on the damp sand. She stopped just beyond Samuel, no more than a few meters from the collapsed male. The distance was thin, fragile, and the men held their breath. At this range, any sudden change could break the balance, but she did not charge, and she did not retreat. Instead, she lowered her body slightly, shoulders bending, as though pulled by the weight of his weakness. Samuel's voice was low, almost inaudible. "She knows him." His words carried no alarm, only recognition. The lioness inched forward, lowering her head near the male's mane. Her nose brushed his neck once, a small contact that stirred him. His chest jolted with another cough, sending a spray of water against the sand. She did not move away. Her body remained steady, her head close, her breath mingling with his shallow exhales. The rangers exchanged glances, the reality setting in. The shocking arrival was not an attack, but a reunion. The pride had not abandoned him. At least one had followed. That changed everything. If he rose, he would not be alone. If he failed, she would not let him go unnoticed. Her presence carried both comfort and risk. To the male, it was life recognized. To the men, it was a reminder of the line they walked. They were close enough to touch a lioness at watch. The lion stirred again, lifting his head slightly, his eyes clearer this time. His gaze locked on hers, and for a moment the strain of his breathing seemed less heavy. She pressed her nose once more against his mane, then lifted her head to glance at the men. Her stare was steady, unblinking, but it carried no aggression. She was measuring them, holding still as though to say she understood what had been done. The moment stretched long, fragile as glass. Then the lioness shifted, moving closer to her companion. Her flank brushed his shoulder as she stood guard. The men did not move forward, and she did not press closer to them. The air was balanced on a thread, silence wrapping tight around the river's edge. The truth was plain. They had saved a lion, and in return, they now faced the gaze of another who had come to bear witness. The river ran quieter now, its roar muted by distance, though the air still carried the damp chill of spray. The young male lay heavy on the sand, his breaths shallow but steadier than before, each rise of his chest pulling against the weight of exhaustion. Beside him stood the lioness, her presence unmistakable, her movements precise. She bent once more, lowering her head to sniff along his mane, her nose brushing against the wet fur. A low rumble sounded deep in her throat, not loud but steady, like a call meant for him alone. He shifted faintly in response, his paw dragging a small line through the sand, too weak to lift but alive enough to answer her touch. The men did not move. Every step, every sound mattered here. The distance between predator and human was narrow, measured only in breaths. Samuel remained closest, crouched just beyond the lion's shoulder. His hand still rested lightly on the damp mane, not restraining, only steadying. When the lioness lifted her head from the male, her eyes shifted and locked on him. The moment held firm, an invisible line drawn across the sand. Her gaze did not flare with aggression. It was deep, unblinking, a measure of recognition. She had seen enough to know he had not come as a threat. The male's body bore marks of the water, not of men. Still, instinct made the air thick. One wrong move, one hurried gesture, and the fragile balance could snap. Samuel's breath came slow and even, his eyes steady but calm. He did not look away. The lioness's head tilted slightly, her ears flicking as if weighing the sound of his calm breathing. Then she stepped forward, paws silent against the damp ground. Each pace was careful, deliberate, until the distance between her and Samuel was little more than a man's reach. She lowered her nose once again toward the lion, but this time she paused midway, inhaling the air that held both the scent of her companion and the presence of humans. The line had closed. Predators and humans shared the same space. The male coughed again, body jolting with the effort, and the sound broke the stillness. Samuel pressed his palm lightly against the mane to steady him. The lioness's eyes followed the motion, sharp, alert, but she did not strike. Instead, she lingered, as though acknowledging that the touch was not harmful. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to that triangle. The weakened lion, the watchful lioness, the man kneeling between them. The other rangers held still behind, hands ready on the rope but unmoving. Their faces carried the tension of men who knew what stood before them. A moment that could not be forced, only endured. One whispered, "If she turns." But the words trailed off, unfinished. They all knew the risk. If she turned, it would be too late. But she did not. Her gaze returned to Samuel, and in the silence that followed, something rare unfolded. It was not trust in the way of humans, not agreement spoken, but a stillness shared. She had seen her companion drawn from the river and had watched the men pull him to safety instead of away. Her eyes held that knowledge, steady, without fear. Samuel breathed once more, quiet and sure, and for a rare moment predator and human held an unspoken understanding. Then, slowly, the lioness shifted her weight, turning her body to stand more firmly over the male. Her flank brushed against him, offering her own strength where he had failed. Samuel eased back a fraction, giving space, but not retreating fully. The rope at his side dropped into the sand, forgotten for now. The lioness blinked once, slow and deliberate, then lowered her head again to the mane. The moment of balance remained, delicate but whole. The risk had not vanished. It never would. But the river's danger had passed, and in its place stood something equally powerful, the brief recognition between species that survival had been shared. At the water's edge, where death had almost claimed him, life held on, guarded now not only by men but by one of his own. The lion's breaths steadied into a fragile rhythm, each inhale still rough but deeper than before. His body, heavy with exhaustion, began to stir. His forelegs shifted, dragging against the sand as he tried to push himself up. The effort was clumsy, his muscles trembling under the strain. But it was movement, and movement meant life. The lioness remained pressed close to him, her flank brushing his mane, lending him silent support. She watched without impatience, every motion of her body angled to shield him from falling back toward the river's edge. Samuel leaned back slightly, giving space as the animal's strength began to return in thin, fragile threads. The other rangers stayed still, their hands lowering the rope quietly to the sand. The work was done now. The rest belonged to the lion and his pride. The male groaned, chest heaving as his front legs locked beneath him. His body rose only halfway before sagging again, his muzzle striking the sand with a dull thud. For a moment it seemed he would collapse completely. But then his head lifted once more, and with a harsh cough, he forced himself upright again. Each step was a battle. His hindquarters shook violently, tail dragging in the wet grit, but he leaned toward the lioness who steadied him simply by standing close. She moved slowly beside him, her body brushing his as if guiding him forward. The male pressed his weight against her flank, staggering, but managing another step, and then another. His mane shed water in small streams, darkened by the sun that now broke through the clouds above. The rangers watched in silence, understanding their part had ended. Samuel's eyes followed each movement carefully, but he did not rise to interfere. The risk remained. If the lion faltered too far, he might collapse again. Yet it was no longer theirs to manage. This was the lion's passage back to his own kind. At the line where the sand met the taller grasses, shadows shifted. Shapes emerged, still and silent. The pride had gathered, their eyes fixed on the staggering figure of the male as he leaned against his companion. Not one stepped forward. They waited, steady, their forms quiet among the stalks. The lioness led him toward them, her pace slow, careful, never leaving his side. The male lifted his head with visible effort, his chest swelled, forcing another breath through lungs still raw with water. His paws struck the ground unevenly, his claws dragging, but he continued forward. Each step brought him nearer to the waiting pride, each breath a small victory against the weight of the river still clinging to him. When at last they reached the edge of the grasses, the lioness paused. The pride parted slightly, creating space without sound. The male entered, head low but eyes clearer now. the tremble in his body still strong but no longer collapsing him. He was back among them. The rangers remained by the water, saying nothing. They did not follow. Samuel drew in a long breath, his shoulders easing for the first time since the river had pulled the lion under. The truth was plain. The rescue had not ended with men pulling rope, but with the lion's own steps, each one reclaiming his place among those who had waited. At the grass line, the pride closed around him, brushing against his sides, silent witnesses to his survival. The pride closed around the weakened male, their bodies brushing against him with quiet acceptance. The lioness who had guarded him at the river's edge remained closest, her flank steady against his trembling frame. Together they moved into the tall grass, their steps unhurried but certain, each stride taking them deeper into the cover of the plains. The grass swayed in slow rhythm, swallowing them piece by piece until only their backs and tails showed above the stalks. The wet sand where the male had lain was marked with paw prints pressed deep by exhaustion. Water still dripped from his mane, leaving a faint trail that darkened the earth behind him. Samuel stood where the sand met the grass, his boots heavy in the mud. The rope lay coiled at his feet, forgotten now. The other rangers lingered a few steps behind, silent, watching the pride disappear. None spoke. The moment did not ask for words. It carried its own weight, the rare balance between human effort and wild survival, witnessed and then released. The lion had not been pulled into cages, not forced into enclosures. He had been given space to stand again, to walk where his kind belonged. The grass closed thicker around the pride. Soon, only the flick of a tail showed their path. Then, even that vanished. The land reclaimed its silence, broken only by the steady rush of the river behind. Wet paw prints remained stamped in the sand, slowly fading as the damp edges bled into one another. Samuel's eyes lingered on them, knowing they marked not just where the lion had passed, but where he had returned from death's edge. One of the men shifted, drawing in a slow breath as though to speak, then stopped. Words would have less meaning than the silence itself. The rescue had not been a triumph to shout but a moment to carry quietly, the kind that lived longer in memory than in telling. Samuel bent once, lifting the rope from the sand, coiling it back into order. His hands moved without hurry, each motion steady. The task was practical, but beneath it lay the need to ground himself, to return to the rhythm of work after something so rare had unfolded. He glanced once more at the grasses. No movement showed now, only the endless sway of stalks in the breeze. The pride had gone, their presence folded back into the wild. It was how it was meant to be. The risk had been immense. If the rope had slipped, if the breaths had failed, if the lioness had judged wrongly, any of it could have ended differently. Yet here the outcome was clear. A life restored to its place, witnessed by both man and kin. The river gurgled softly, its power undiminished, indifferent to what had just passed on its edge. The air smelled of wet earth and vegetation, heavy with the memory of struggle. Samuel straightened, his gaze lingering one last time on the sand. He knew the tracks would fade by evening, washed smooth by wind or water, but for him, they would remain. As the sun broke through the thinning clouds, light spilled across the riverbank soft and golden, catching on the damp ground. The men turned to leave, their steps slow, their silence unbroken. Behind them, the grasses swayed, hiding the pride within their depths. Ahead, the land stretched wide and open as it always had. The lions were gone from sight, but not from memory. The bank stood empty again, nature closing in with quiet grace.